All right, welcome back to Fantrax Dynasty Baseball. Continuing on down this top 10 Orioles prospect list. Number 4, Van, we get to hear from you finally. We've got a fan favorite, a show favorite anyway. I don't know if our fans / listeners care that we say Ryan Mountcastle every time, but we sure like to say it.
Turns out that you're the man now, dog, and I completely agree. Ryan Mountcastle, he was the 36th player taken off the board by the Orioles in the 2015 amateur draft, and he was taken out of Haggerty High School in Oviedo, Florida. Do you know where that is, Ron? How close is that to you?
I don't know where it is, so it's not that close.
There you go.
Yeah, when you start out with that's the sound of somebody that has no idea
where that is. I'm stalling. Exactly, yes.
No idea. I couldn't get my Google Maps up quick enough, so now I had to bail out.
Well, he was not taken anywhere near Ron, but he was also pretty much taken at this spot with the sole purpose of saving money for later in the draft. At the time, he was only ranked the 122nd player of the draft via Baseball America, 108th per Fangraphs, and 125th on Baseball Perspective. And again, he was taken 36th overall. So this was pretty much just a money-saving maneuver by the Orioles. You could look at the rest of the draft and see if that panned out. I don't know if it did, but I think what it did pan out in is that Mountcastle is probably a major leaguer. That's maybe the nicest thing I'll be able to say about him going forward. His best asset at the time was described as, quote, lightning fast bat speed. So there was hope that he could kind of turn into a guy who could hit for a decent average and eventually provide a bit of home run power. There is not much speed here, though. In his first 2 years in the minors, he stole 23 bases. And then he followed that up with the next several years of 4 stolen bases total. So don't look to those early career stolen bases as an indication that he can run. He cannot. Now, for the most part, he's delivered on the decent batting average promise. He's hit .295 in his minor league career, but he's also only hit 70 home runs in 2,217 plate appearances. So the power really has not been there. Looking to his most recent season, we can see Mountcastle saw a bit of promise as he put together a 312, 344, 527 line and had 25 home runs in 553 AAA plate appearances. And one thing that stands out, if you look at that, is that really poor walk rate, 312 batting average to 344 OBP. That's not something that you're really going to see change. He walks just a tick over 5% of the time in the minors and has not shown any indication that he's going to get better at taking pitches. So do not really think of him as a good OBP guy. You're not going to get much in the way of that. And it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon. So overall, there's not a whole lot to see here. He's likely going to be, I don't know, maybe a third outfielder on your fantasy team at best, simply because he really hasn't done much to prove he's anything more than a decent batting average guy with middling pop. In his best years, I see maybe 300, 340, 480 with 25 to 30 home runs, which isn't necessarily anything to sneeze at. But with this market and era of huge power, that's just not all that exciting. It will be nice to see if the batting average does stay up, because that is something that's slightly beneficial. But also, we talk about this all the time with guys like this that don't walk very much. The room for error is extreme, because when they struggle, they're not going to get on base. They're not going to score runs. And so if this guy really gets any trouble with the batting average department, that's really going to hamper his overall game. I think the good comp, if you think he's becomes the best of what he can be, it's going to be Nicholas Castellanos, because Castellanos is also the guy who really can't throw, which Mountcastle can't do either. Mountcastle can play third base. He can field. He just can't throw very well. So they eventually moved Castellanos to left field, and I could see that happening with Mountcastle as well. Again, batting average, a little bit of power, but nothing too special. So an okay guy, maybe a decent prospect, but definitely not one that's going to carry your fantasy team.
Now we'll see if that low walk rate is, enough to keep him from hitting first or second, because that's a lot of his value is going to hinge on there. I wonder if he does make his debut next year, if the Orioles are just so bad that they don't really care. They're just like, oh, at least he hits 300 or 280 or whatever. We'll just throw him a leadoff anyway. But in this era, we've seen a lot of teams will put the likes of Kyle Schwarber lead off just because he takes a ton of walks. So I think a lot of Mountcastle's value is going to be tied into where he sits in that batting lineup.
And and to piggyback on that, I mean, the Orioles, they have 10 players exactly like this on the team. I mean, Trey Mancini, it's pretty similar. Austin Hayes to an extent. You've got a lot of guys that are just this kind of middle. Yeah, they definitely have a type. This is their boyfriend type. So I foresee him getting playing time. I don't see why they wouldn't, unless he comes up and really struggles at the bat and hits 210, 220. Maybe they kind of cut him down. But I do think he'll be in line for some decent playing time, which is valuable in any regard.
Yeah, so that was number 4, Ryan Mountcastle. Moving on to number 5 here, Eric. We have a bit of a vexing player here in Austin Hayes.
Yeah, and you guys just basically described this entire system where, outside of those top three that we talked about before the break, those are only three you really get excited about. Like there's some decent guys like Van mentioned, and that kind of made me laugh too. You talking about, this Mountcastle's like the typical Baltimore player because my comp for him for a while now has been kind of like a poor man's Adam Jones, where he'll hit for a decent average because he puts the bat on the ball, but doesn't walk a whole lot. Give you 25 bombs or so, but yeah, and his defense was atrocious. Like his arm was horrible. Mountcastle I'm talking about, and defense, his footwork was just pathetic. So first base, I guess, I don't know, maybe he's a DH, who knows. But yeah, Austin Hayes, yeah, he's kind of been very up and down career. Wasn't a really highly touted guy in the draft. Solid guy, but he was a third round pick. But you didn't see him overly high on many draft boards. But came out on fire. His first full year in 2017. He split time between high A and double A. He hit 329, 958 OPS, 32 bombs, 95 RBIs, threw in 5 steals. Got himself a kind of a surprise promotion. Got about 20 games in with Baltimore end of the year. Didn't do much at all. Did hit his first career home run then, but then 2018, he returned to the minors because there wasn't really a spot for him. And he struggled. He only hit 235, 12 home runs in 327 plate appearances. He had a nagging ankle injury that cost him some time, so he couldn't really, really get his footing. No pun intended, under him. So, you kind of chalk that up to a lost year. He definitely wasn't himself. And then even 2019, he got promotion up to Baltimore end of the season, and he did fairly well. He had 309, 4 bombs, 21 games. But in the minors, where he played across basically every level possible, he only hit 248, 17 home runs, and 378 plate appearances. But he's the type of guy that he's not going to excite you like most of the guys in the system, like I said. But he's a solid all around player, both sides of the ball. He's not overly fast. He's probably I'd say maybe average foot speed, but he's just a really solid player in the outfield. He makes the necessary plays, and he's got, like I said, decent foot speed. He takes good routes to the ball. So he made a really good catch in center field. I think it was last week where he was kind of going back towards right center. But he's a guy that offensively, again, solid. He's, I guess, solid. I can't say solid about this guy enough. This is what he is. He's kind of like Mountcastle, where he doesn't walk a whole lot, but he has pretty good contact skills. Can use the whole field. I'd say average to above average raw power. Probably a guy that settles in as maybe a 20 to 25 home run type. Maybe gets up, maybe capped at 30, probably in the 20s more often than not. With an average that won't kill you. He probably settle in 260 to 280 in that range. Throw in 5 to 10 steals maybe. So he's a guy that you'll never be excited about drafting. He'll be a guy you probably get the later at peak. Maybe he's a mid-round guy that you kind of fill in an outfield, like your third outfielder or something. Just one of those safe guys where you'll probably get some solid production out of him, but nothing's gonna put you over the top. But should get some playing time next year. I said he came up and performed pretty well this year at the end of the season, so probably we'll get a shot at full-time gig next year, and maybe you throw a late round flyer at him, see what he can do. But just a decent all-around player.
Flyer is about as much as I would be willing to give him in 2020 until he shows me a little bit more. Like you said, the debut this year was nice. Well, it's not the debut, but the brief stint that he finally had this year. Anyway, it's just nice seeing him kind of bounce back after that crazy 2018. And of course, that was Austin Hayes at number 5. And number 6 is Yusniel Diaz. And he was the big return for the Orioles in the Manny Machado trade. Unfortunately for the Orioles, Diaz is not a very high ceiling player. And to make matters worse, he missed a ton of time this year. He played just 85 games, hitting 265, 341, 464, 11 home runs, and 0 steals. It's a pretty average-sized guy, I guess, at about 6'1", 200 pounds. But He's not going to be a source of stolen bases, and nor can he play center field. And that pretty much means that if he's going to be an everyday player, he needs to hit, and he'll get to put those on-base skills to the test next year as a 23-year-old, and will probably move to AAA at some point. And if he does crush at AAA, maybe he even makes his ML debut at some point in 2020. He'll need to stay healthy, though, because 2019 was not the only year in which he's missed time. In fact, he has only ever played over 100 games once since he made his debut back in 2016. So if everything comes together, he could be a 25-homer, 360 on-base type. But even that is a guy who you can find pretty easily these days in standard mixed leagues. So overall, I would say Yusniel Diaz is not a guy I'm very enamored with, and he's got a lot of risk of being a fourth outfielder due to his lack of defensive profile. And of course, that's number 6, Yusniel Diaz. So